Hey guys, my name's Aaron. In this video series, I'm working on a Facebook chatbot that sends you a new news article every morning. And the last part, I worked on setting up a basic node.js server and got some of the basic details ironed out. And this next part, I'm going to start creating a few more functions for subscribing users to events, as well as showing more articles in the Messenger feed. Again, this video series is about 99% code, so if you aren't interested in that kind of thing, I would stop watching now. Otherwise, let's get started. I'm on my Raspberry Pi here, and the first thing I want to do is start by installing Mongodb. And Mongodb is a NoSQL database primarily used in the node.js world because it has a bunch of modules that make storing and retrieving data pretty easy. So this is the Mongodb website, and NoSQL databases are kind of preferred over SQL databases because they scale better, they're faster. So like scaling doesn't really matter in this scenario because we're just installing this on a Raspberry Pi. It's not like a clustered setup or anything like that, but it is pretty nice to work with, so this is what I chose to use for this project. I found this website here, and it looks like it's a good guide for helping you install the binaries for a Raspberry Pi 2 or a 3. And usually when you install MongoDB on a normal computer or a Linux system, it's much easier than this. But you have to compile these files from source in order to make it work on the Raspberry Pi 3. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to get this working, but let's get started. So the first thing I want to do here is come back to my Raspberry Pi and update my system. And I can do that by running sudo apt-get update. Okay, so now everything's updated. One thing I forgot to mention is I put these two guides for installing Node.js and MongoDB on the GitHub page. So if I go to the GitHub page and then click on this link, it'll take you to the link that I was just showing earlier. The next thing I want to do is come down here and download both the binaries for MongoDB as well as MongoDB tools. So there are two links here that you need to click and download both of these. So this is downloading here, and then also queue this one up as well. What's nice about this website is all of these MongoDB files were pre-compiled specifically for this Raspberry Pi, so you don't need to compile your own binaries, which is really nice. First thing I'm going to do is extract these, and for now I'm just going to extract them to my downloads. The next thing it wants us to do is check for a MongoDB user, which obviously we don't have set up yet, but I'll copy this, go back to my terminal and run it. So now in order to add a user, I'm going to use this command. The next thing it wants us to do is move to the directory with all of those Mongo files that you just extracted. Ensure that you are the appropriate owner of those files, and then strip out the symbols to reduce the file size and move those files so that they are part of your path so that you can just call them directly from the command line. So I'm going to come here and start running these commands. So we're in the home directory right now. Let's go to downloads, and this is where our files should be. Yep, so they're all here: MongoD, Mongo, and then all those utilities files. So let's start running these commands. And now I'm going to copy this to my path. Cool. And then the next thing it wants to do is create a log file directory and then set the permissions so that MongoDB has access to it. So I'm going to do this by making a directory. Okay. And then set the permissions. The next thing is creating a DB data directory with convenient access permissions. So create a directory where we can store data and then adjust the permissions so that MongoDB can access it. So for this, we are also going to make a directory, and then we are going to set the permissions again. And then I'll just use this command and switch this to lib. Change this to root. And then give it rights. Alright, so now I'm going to create a config file. So let's go to the etc folder. And then let's open vi with this new file name, mongodb.config. Nothing's here yet. So now it wants us to insert some data into this file. If you're not familiar with vi, you can press I to insert, press exit to exit the insert mode, and then I use capital ZZ to save. So I pressed I, I'm in the insert mode, and now it wants us to insert into file this right here. So I'm just going to copy this and then go back to VI, paste. These are all of our configs for MongoDB. So it has our log path, it has our data path, it has our IP, which is localhost, and some other configs. So if I hit exit and then ZZ, it will save this file. Next thing it wants us to do is create a systemd/service entry. And now I'm going to go into this directory, lib/systemd/system, and I am going to edit a file called mongodb.service. There's nothing here yet. So now we will insert this data into this file. So going into the insert mode, and paste. And then exit, capital ZZ, save that. And so now it says we're ready to launch MongoDB. So let's see if this works. If we run sudo service MongoDB start. And then we can check the status of this by running sudo service MongoDB status. And it looks like it's running, so awesome. We have this set up. I'm on my Mac now, and I've done a bit of refactoring since the last video. Originally, I had two folders outside, in this directory called views and routes, and I still have those folders, but I've moved them inside of this app directory. Now I have views and routes as well as public. Those were all there before, but I've also created 3 more directories called config, controller, and model. And I've also created a few more files in these directories so that the code is a little bit more organized. So if I go into my routes, initially, if you remember, I had all of my webhooks endpoints inside of this index.js file, but I've actually moved those now to my webhooks.js file. And I don't have /webhook here for both these endpoints because I configure that in my app.js file. So I've moved the location of all of these routing files. So now they're in apps, routes, and so I've created this third one called webhooks, which is apps, routes, webhooks. And then I've also configured this so that it has it's prepended with this webhook. So whatever endpoints I create in here will always be prepended by /webhook. So it's nice because if I want to add more things to this, or if I want to create more versions, I could do /v2 and then do whatever I want instead of just a slash here. So it's nice because you don't have to prepend webhook to everything. In addition to that, I've also created a controller for our API. So I have imported this controller, which I define in my controller folder here. All of the parsing code for articles and sending text messages is now in this app.js file. And it's nice because I can just call this function directly from my router here. So if you remember before we had a callback, now instead of creating a callback, we just pass in a function, which is, in this case, token verification would be this function right here. The function is almost like an object where you can pass it in, again, as a parameter to another function. The last thing I did was created this properties file, and I'm using this to export variables that I use for doing various things. So I have my Facebook token, my Facebook challenge, the Facebook message endpoint, as well as the Google News endpoint. And I just put them here because it's easy to change them if I want to change them. The first thing I'm going to do is write some logic that allows you to show more articles in Messenger. I'm just going to hard code this for now, but eventually once we have our wit AI set up, it will be able to understand your intent so that you can say something more generic, and it will actually know that you want to show more. So for example, I could say show more or show me more or I'm looking for more articles, and the AI should be able to determine that your intent is to find more articles. But instead of hard coding all those cases, I'm just going to hard code one case and write the logic so that we can handle the wit AI intent later. So in this case, just to make it a little bit more generic, I'm going to convert the text to lowercase. So as you remember, we get this text object back from the messenger request, and I'm going to convert this to lowercase, and then I'm also going to replace all white spaces with empty string. So what this is doing is, say somebody says show more and then they have a trailing space, or show more one word, or capital show space more. It'll handle all of those cases so that we can have a bit more variance in our text string. Now I'm going to create a switch statement. I'm going to create a variable here called normalized text, and then I'm going to pass in our normalized text here and create a case which says show more. And then I'm also going to create one more default case here And I'm going to create a break after each one of these. But first, I'm going to make sure that I have articles. And then I'm going to copy my error handling code here. So if there's an error, just log it to the console. Else. And then let's use our switch statement to determine what the user wants to do with this data. So in the default case, we'll just send back one article. But in the case of show more, we'll actually want to send back more than one article. I looked at the Facebook API and I could only find documentation on sending one message back at a time. So we're just gonna have to call this send text message function a few times to send multiple articles. So the first thing I'm gonna do is find the max number of articles that I can send back, and then limit that by a certain number. So in this case, probably send back 5 articles, but we don't know exactly how many articles we got back in this articles array from our getArticles function. So I want to determine the max number that I can send back. Let's create a new variable called max articles, and we'll set that equal to math.min of the article's length and 5. If we receive less than 5 articles, we'll send back less than 5 articles. Otherwise, we'll send back 5. Then we'll create a loop. Let's say for var I equals 0, I is less than max articles, I plus plus, pretty basic stuff. Then we'll send text message from sender, the sender that we received, and articles I. So now if I say show more, it'll show the first 5 articles that we received. All right, it looks like I forgot to add a parentheses here, so let's just go down here, add a parentheses, save it again, run it, and now our server's working. So let's go back to my testbot page, send this a message, show more, and now we got 5 articles back. Now I'm going to start working with MongoDB on my Mac, and instead of trying to connect to MongoDB on my Raspberry Pi through my Mac, I'm just going to download it directly on my Mac, and it'll make setup much easier because then I don't have to change the IP for the database that I'm connecting to. I'm going to link this article in the video, but it basically just shows you how to install on the big 3. So there's an install guide for Linux, install guide for Mac and Windows. For Mac, it's pretty easy. As long as you have Homebrew installed, you can just install MongoDB and it takes care of the rest of everything for you. But if you don't have Homebrew installed, you have to download the binaries manually and add them to your path. So I would recommend downloading Homebrew if you can. I'm just going to skip over this part because I've already showed you how to install it on the Raspberry Pi. I'm just going to run MongoD, and this will start our MongoDB instance on local. So now I'm going to open up a new terminal window. So my MongoDB is running in the background. I'm going to navigate back to my my directory for my Facebook Newsbot, and now I'm going to npm install MongoDB, and I'm going to save that. And I have this getting started guide for working with MongoDB and node.js. After installing, I'm just going to copy these 2 lines, so I'm going to import these modules in my app.js file. Paste this, and then I'll paste this code, which is used to basically open a connection, make sure it connects properly, and then closes the DB. And this is running off localhost, so this should work for both my Raspberry Pi and my Mac. I'll just create another comment here that says MongoDB, and then I'll paste this code. Save it, and then run npm start. And now we've connected to our database. I am actually going to change my MongoDB client to a Mongoose client. And Mongoose is, in my opinion, slightly better than MongoDB because it allows you to easily map objects and save, update, retrieve those objects. In order to install Mongoose, I have to install a new module. So I go back to my terminal, sudo npm install Mongoose, and I'll save that. I'm going to go back to my app.js file and remove all the code that I just added. And I have this getting started guide for Mongoose, and so I'm just going to copy some of the sample code they posted here, import Mongoose, and then connect to the database. So this also manages your database connection, which is very nice. And I'll change this back to test. And then let's save this, run it again just to test it out. And it looks like it's connected. I want to define a user model, and my user model is going to be used for subscribing users so that every morning I can send them a new news article. They posted some sample code on here, and I'm going to copy some of this. First thing I'm going to do is come back to our app, go into the app folder, and then let's see, I'll create a new folder for model, and then I'm going to create a new file called user.js, and I'll save this in the model folder. I'll copy this code, and then going back here, I'll just paste it. So what it's doing is importing the Mongoose module, and then creating a schema object for which we will add our user schema. So currently we only have a user ID. So if you remember, going back here, we have this sender ID that we extract from our message body. What you can do is you can create unique required fields, as well as just fields that you used to sort data for other things. So in the future, we'll probably have a name, so let's keep this. And then all of this stuff, we don't receive any of this. We don't receive any of this in our response here, so I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to keep the created and updated at date here, but I'll change this username to, let's call it FBID, or use the same naming convention that Mongoose uses here, and this will be a string. The next thing they do is create the model for it in Mongoose and update the schema, and then they export the user so other files can use this schema. So I'll save this. We'll have to update this user in the database somehow. Going down here, we can see some sample usage. In this case, they import the user schema, they create a new user, and then they can save the user in the database. I'm just going to create a simple function here so that I can test this out. Somehow my switch statement code got deleted, so I added it back in. And now I'm just going to create another function here that subscribes a user. So let's just call this function subscribe user, and let's give this function a parameter of ID. So we'll go back to our getting started guide for Mongoose here, and then we'll import our user. So going up to the top of this, let's say our user equals require the user model, and then we also want to create an object when the user subscribes. So let's paste this code here, and then I'm going to call this new user equals FB ID, and then we'll pass in that ID that we used earlier. And since our user is pretty lightweight right now, we don't have any other values. Come down here, and then I want to save our new user. And then let's say if our user was saved correctly, we'll send a message that says you've been saved. So I'm going to change my function down here where it says send text message to make it more apparent what this function does. So I'm just going to change this to send article message, and then come up here and change it for both of these. I'm going to copy that Facebook code that I copied last time so that we can send a text message. The code's changed slightly since the last video I've posted on their getting started guide, so I'll just use the new code. So I'll copy this send text message. I'll just replace it here. And then they have another function called call send API. So I will copy this and then post it here. And so I've made some changes myself to that function, so I'm just going to copy over the changes that I made here. For the properties with the access token. And then I am going to update that in my other function as well. So we'll just call send API with our message data that we created up here. And then I'll be able to now send a text message as well. Going back to this function, change this to new user, and then we will send a text message with new user dot Facebook ID and a message, you've been subscribed. And so I also want to create another case statement in here, maybe for a /subscribe directive. So we'll say case subscribe, and in this case we'll call our subscribe user function with the ID of sender. Save that. One thing I forgot to do was add the recipient to the message data. So since this call send API is just expecting an entire message data object, and we added our recipient and message to our send text message. I just included that in the message data object as well for our send article message. And I've been thinking about this. In the case that our user is already in the database, we won't be able to save it because our Facebook ID is unique and we are trying to create a new user. So instead, I'm going to use the function find one and update. And I have some code already written out here. So I'm just going to copy this and work off this. So I'll paste it here just so I can see. And I also don't want to throw an error if there's an error. I just want to gracefully handle it. So in this case, I'm going to send a text message to our user with the text, there was an error subscribing you for daily articles. And this will just prevent any error stopping our server. In the other case, if there was a success, I am going to do the same thing. And then we also have to update this function with some other parameters. We're going to find the user by their Facebook ID, which should be ID. We are going to save the new ID, which should be the same. And then we are going to make sure that the upsert option is true. So if it's not there, we'll create it. Otherwise, we will update it. I am going to change this to user and then delete this old function. Oh, and then, sorry, I forgot I have to remove the old code. Find one and update is actually a function on my user object, not an instance of my user object. So I'm going to change this back to user, run our server once more, and then let's test this out. And now I've been subscribed. One more thing that I want to do is add another break statement after our subscribe user. So just to test this out, start again, /subscribe, and now we don't get that extra article at the end. I'm going to make one more function for unsubscribing a user. Then I'll create a directive for that as well. So I'll call this unsubscribe, subscribe user. Give it a ID, and then I'm just gonna copy this and change update to delete. Just remove that. I'm going to change some of these messages, create my directive up here, call this one unsubscribe, and call my unsubscribe function. And forget to add user to this. One more issue, it's called find one and remove. So delete. Okay, now I've been unsubscribed. I worked on a couple things and I didn't record them, just because it's kind of the same stuff that I've been doing. I've added this case here for subscribe status, And this directive is used for determining what your subscribe status is. And it's just easy to use this for debugging. I created this function subscribe status, and it's basically the same as my other functions here for subscribe, unsubscribe, but all it does is finds a user. If it finds a user, it sends subscribe status true, otherwise it sends false. And I can use this here for just determining, like I said, what the subscribe status is. I also moved around some of this code in my switch statement. I figured that getting articles every time probably wasn't the right way to go about doing things, and in the future I'll probably even cache the articles so that I don't have to make a request every time I want to handle one of these cases for show more or just sending one article. So I moved that in the default case, and like I said, I'll probably edit this function later. And then all of these other actually, whoops, I just realized I didn't delete this. All of these other directives are outside of this function. Now, since I have subscribed users, I can actually send them an article on a schedule every morning. And in order to do that, I'm going to use a node module called node schedule. And it basically works like a cron scheduler. You set up an interval, and then you can take action every time this callback is executed. So what I'll end up doing is install this node scheduler, set up a callback for every morning at, say, 9 a.m., and then I'll get all of the users in the database and fire off a function that, or fire off a message that sends them the newest articles. And before doing that, like I said, I'll probably cache all of the articles so that I don't have to make several calls. So in order to do this, I am going to go back to my terminal and npm install node schedule. And then I'm going to copy this code, go back to my app.js file because it's probably just easiest to post it here. Import my schedule module, and then set up a schedule job callback. So this is kind of a nice representation of cron scheduling. And with cron jobs, you have these text identifiers that represent a schedule. So as you can see here, the first star represents seconds, the second star represents minutes, third hours, fourth day of the month, fifth month, and sixth day of the week. And depending on which stars that you replace with numbers, you can set a schedule. So in this case, like I said, maybe I'll send a new news article at 9 a.m. every morning. I can just change this third star to a 9, and it should send the update at 9 a.m. So going back to my code here, get rid of this, and then I'll update this star so that it's a 9. And as long as I keep this server running, this callback should happen at 9. I filled this function out now, and I realized that the seconds place in this cron job is actually optional, so you could put this extra asterisk here. So this is actually, what was this, days in the month? Yeah, days of month rather than hours. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm also going to change this so that we're using 9 here instead of here. Going through this, I just created these few lines of code to find all the users in the database, check if we get users back from the database, and then for each user that we get back, I am going to get articles and then send an article message. And this can actually be moved outside of here. So I don't call it for every single user. And so once I get each user, I can send a message to their specific Facebook ID. So let's just change this to, so it's 6:26 right now. Let's change this to every 27th minute. Save it and then start our server. Once it turns 6:27, we'll receive a message in Messenger. All right, so then we just got our message in Messenger. So we verified that this is working. I'm going to change this back to 9, and then I'm going to push my code to GitHub. The next thing to do is pull all my files on my Raspberry Pi, and then install all of my dependencies. And now I should be running my chatbot on my Raspberry Pi. Alright guys, that's all for this video. Still a few more things I have to iron out. Some of the code is a little buggy and there's some error cases that I need to handle, but I'll come back in the next video with all that sorted out. If there are any links in this video, they should be posted in the description below. And if they aren't, feel free to leave a comment to let me know and I'll try to get those posted ASAP. In the next video, I'm going to start working with Wit AI and set up our AI engine so that it can recognize intent. Once it knows intent, I'll be able to hook up the functions that I created in this video. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with this project as well as other projects, including our Raspberry Pi Arduino-powered robotic bartender that mixes drinks for you. Also, if you have any suggestions or feedback, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and we'll try to make these videos better in the future. Until then, see you next time.